streamed right now. And as you know, the algorithms for YouTube and Facebook are just garbling us up. But it is up to you now to start sharing and spreading this information. This is very powerful information to get to know the mind of an addict. And so let me go ahead and start the record button. And again, you guys, I'm in a new setting today. So, okay, today we have Brian Cuban. The book is called The Addicted Lawyer that we're going to be talking today, but there's more because he's got a new novel that's coming out and we're going to talk about that later on. So tell everybody that Mark is on and fasten your seatbelt because we're going to get in the moment. We're going to listen to some music, dance, and learn together. Here we go. It's time to dance.
The Lillian McDermott Show.
We love, we fear, bridges we burn, we make mistakes, then we live and learn. When life gets tough, and it seems like your best ain't good enough. If you're in need of hope, you know where I'll be right here, right here. And when you need a friend, you can count on me. I'll be right here, waiting for
you. This is the place you can always turn to when you need a friend. The Lillian McDermott Show. To reach out to Lillian, visit her on the web at whenyouneedafriend.com. Now let's all learn together. Here's Lillian McDermott.
Hello, my listening and viewing friend. It's so nice we can meet each other on the air on this beautiful best day ever. And for those of you who have turned in for the first time, please know I've been waiting for you. This is a safe place where you can go to when you need a friend. It is my commitment to provide alternative ways to heal, and it is my mission to make awareness, responsibility, and truth a part of our everyday life. And I hope you, my listening, as well as my viewing friend, will feel empowered to embrace a new truth and live the life of your dreams. Now, Brian Cuban is someone that you're going to meet today, but probably you may have not heard about him. But today he is going to be the teacher because of his experience, his journey, his trials have become, and his pain have become his passion. And so today we're going to be talking with attorney, recovery advocate, author, Brian Cuban. And of course, you hear the name Cuban and you immediately think Mark Cuban. And yes, he is the brother, but standalone, Brian is very good at what he does. And so the books that he's created, this book that's called The Addicted Lawyer, that if you go to my website and you click on, you can go and get your own copy of the book, it's his memoir of there we go. Thank you, Vanna. Okay. So it's his memoir of his life of addiction, bulimia, and cocaine. When I say cocaine, alcohol, bulimia, all these things, and you're thinking, gosh, but this is a guy. Why would he have bulimia? Why would he have well, thank goodness that he's experienced it and shared so that you can learn from him. So perhaps maybe something he says today will be meaningful to you to start changing your life. And since it is our sole purpose in life to give and receive love and knowledge, I am so grateful that Brian Cuban is here to do just that. Welcome, Brian, to the classroom.
Thanks, Lillian. Thanks for having me here.
Yes. So share a little bit about your background, because your background is very interesting, and how it led you to addiction and now as an author.
Sure. Well, the Reader's Digest is that I am a person in long-term recovery. I am moving on to 15 years of in recovery from problem drinking, alcoholism, the label, and cocaine addiction, and as well as bulimia. And I am a lawyer by trade, but I no longer practice law. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. The middle of three boys. I have my older brother Mark, who people know from the Mavericks and Shark Tank. I have a younger brother Jeff. And I went to Penn State undergraduate, the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, and then I've lived in Dallas for over 30 years, and it's been kind of a roller coaster journey from birth to this moment. I said the addictions, 2 trips to a psychiatric hospital, 3 failed marriages, one more, I get a free set of steak knives, and jail. So it's been a rocky journey, but as I said, I have almost 15 years in recovery, and I'm happy and living what I consider my best life, and always trying to improve that best life a little, and very happy to be here speaking with you.
Well, congratulations on your recovery, and it's a journey that may not look pretty, but some gifts come in ugly paper wrapping, but something that's inside of that gift may be an immeasurable treasure, not only for you, but for other people to come.
Well, I get asked quite often if I could turn back the clock, would I do things differently? And I tell them, look, that's revisionist recovery. Mm-hmm. That journey got me here to this moment, exactly. Doing all the things that I love to do, whether it's helping people, whether it's writing, sharing my story. Do I regret that? Absolutely not. Do I have regrets over the people I hurt along the way? Absolutely. Yeah. And I try to make amends for that. I've made personal amends. I try to make living amends for the people I can't do that with personally. So sure, there are those regrets, but I don't regret the journey.
Very good. Yeah, I totally understand this. And, and as I was reading your book, because as you know, we've talked about that, I have a background in personal injury, and I have a background in the medical, I've got a background altogether. And when I was reading your book, I got to see a lot of why I experienced certain things in the past with certain, what was happening, what I was seeing. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I do want to talk about your book. But one of the things is in your book, I got to see how addiction is kind of like not addiction, but drinking and parties is kind of like the undercurrent. It's kind of like it's okay. And you had mentioned in your book that this is a culture that needs to be woken up, that people need to be aware of the things that could happen when you do self-medicate, so to speak. Can you share a little bit by why you wrote this book and how you intend to help other attorneys in the process?
Well, sure. I wrote The Addicted Lawyer because during my time as a lawyer, where I was significantly impaired by drugs and alcohol, I mean, I was doing cocaine in the state courthouse, the federal courthouse. I showed up to hearings under the influence, and I knew other lawyers who were struggling as well. And it was an area that, as I went through it, and now as I progressed in recovery, I came to realize that there were just not enough people talking about this in the legal profession. And my viewpoints were validated by a study about 5 years ago now, sponsored by the American Bar Association in the Hazleton Betty Ford Clinic, that found that lawyers have a problem drinking, quote unquote, alcoholism rate of over twice the general public. Mm-hmm. And lawyers who are 10 years of practice or less are 1 in 3 are problem drinkers. And we had an even more recent study that found that covered parts of the pandemic that found that rates were significantly higher of problem drinking and drug use and depression. So it was a actually very timely book because the study came out right around the time I wrote it. And I went through and I just looked and I researched, and there was really no one talking about it. When I wrote The Addicted Lawyer, not knowing the study was coming out, the last study was in 1990. And what was interesting about that study, Lillian, was that that study in 1990 found that the older lawyers, which would be me now, the boomers, but they weren't the boomer, back then we were the primary demographic. Mm-hmm. And they were the ones who were struggling with problem drinking. And now it is the younger lawyers, the millennials from that study, who were struggling with problem drinking. So it's kind of come 360. Yeah. And who is struggling with alcohol.
Well, it's and by the way, the book is called The Addicted Lawyer, but can you take the information that you have written in this book? Do you think that it's transferable, not just for attorneys, but anyone who has a drug addiction?
Absolutely. I'm a very big believer in adverse childhood consequences, the ACE scale, and how it impacts, has the potential, because cause and correlation are different, right?
Mhm.
How it has the potential to impact anyone, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, a cab driver, or whatever you do for a living. Unresolved adverse childhood experiences have a very high correlation with mental health issues later in life. And so, sure, and as you've read in my book, I had adverse childhood experiences that went unresolved, and which I considered very traumatic. You saw I was bullied.
Why don't you
severely.
share, because for people who haven't read your book, The Addicted Lawyer, share a little bit about your past, because we spend a lot of time here in the classroom talking about, there is Henry Maulding in 1867 said, sadness not expressed in tears may make other organs weep. And this is what leads to disease. This is what leads to the discontentment in our life and addiction. And so I say, he said may, he's a psychiatrist from back 1867, but I say will. And so let's talk about some of your childhood trauma that went undetected, or maybe
I'm always careful about will, because that implies cause, right?
Yeah.
And that means that everything that happens will happen. Then this is going to happen, which I'm always very careful about.
Yeah, and I get that.
To understand, from my personal story, to understand it, we have to go back to Pittsburgh, PA. Like I said, I'm the middle of three boys. I'm a baby boomer, back in an era when cell phones were 2 cups attached to a string. Back when
I remember that
social networking was playing dodgeball, right, and getting the gym and getting the big, the awful shirts and skins, which I dreaded for the guys and gym. And back when going viral meant 15 kids in the lunchroom knew you had a crush on a girl. So a very different time. Yeah. And I was classic middle child syndrome, Lillian. I was shy. I was brutally shy. I trended towards isolation. And I internalized anything negative said about me and wore it as who I was, like kind of a skin-tight suit. And unfortunately, Lillian, I had a difficult relationship with my mother. And this is where I try to be very careful about cause and correlation, okay?
Yeah.
Because
and as a lawyer, and I get it, as a lawyer, that is...
Well, I want to make it clear that, I had this relationship. Parents do not cause addiction. Parents do not cause eating disorders. Things that happen in the home can correlate with mental health issues later in life, but they won't for everyone.
Correct.
And there was a lot of fat shaming in my house. I used to come home from school and I would eat, and this was when I was 13, 14 years old, and I would eat Chef Boyardee ravioli. I'd get the old style can opener and put the spoon in. We didn't have a microwave back then, and eat it out of the can. And my mother would come home from selling real estate, and this didn't happen every time, but she'd say, Brian, if you keep eating that way, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, these were the things my mother's mother said to her. And these were the things I'm sure my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. Fat shaming in families is often passed down generationally. I'm Jewish, and I came from an Eastern European Jewish family. The stereotypical Jewish grandmother, eat, eat, eat. And my mother had this relationship, this verbally and mentally abusive, it was awful, relationship with her bipolar mother. Mm-hmm. So, but it kind of runs downhill. And if this was a time when a young mother in the 70s talking about her own mental health issues, you could end up in an asylum. Mm-hmm. You just didn't talk about these things. Nobody did. Mm-hmm. Right. But not understood. So I don't blame my mother for anything I went through. I need to make that clear.
And I'm glad you don't. That's great.
And, but not understanding these things, to hear these kind of words, I grew depressed, and I was already a heavy kid. And I began eating more Chef Boyardee ravioli and more. And I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And it so often happened when kids change for what other kids perceive in the negative at school, the bullying started to happen. Then it happens now. But it happens now in a much more insidious way with in an anonymous way with the internet. So the fat shaming, the fat teasing, the fat pig, go to Sears and Roebuck and get a bra. And all of this culminated one day in what I call the day of the gold pants. One of the most traumatic moments of my life. My brother, Mark, had who, believe it or not, taught disco back then. This was the era of Saturday Night Fever. If some of your listeners or watchers remember John Travolta, Saturday Night Fever, in his skin-tight white pants. My brother Mark had this pair of skin-tight, shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. And I guess he decided he was going to get a new one, and he gave them to me. And they fit Mark fine, but I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats back there trying to get them on. But I didn't care. I love my brother, and he gave me these pants. We're very close then. We're very close now. And I wore them to school, and the kids made fun of them. But in my mind, Lillian, these kids who were making fun of me were the popular kids, the kids getting their first date, their first kiss, the prom king, the prom queen, the kids going to the ice cream shop and the football game and to the house parties, all of the things I associated with love and acceptance and wanted so badly, but was never invited. So, and they were also sometimes the bullies. Mm-hmm. And so I'm walking, and so I kind of hung around on the outside, hoping that it was like a fraternity hazing. You take it long enough, they wrap their arm around you and say, "You're one of us now, Brian." But that's not how bullying works. Mm-hmm. And so I'm walking home from school with these kids, just kind of, it was 3 or 4 guys walking home in my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants, and they're making fun of me. And they decided that I was just too fat to wear these pants, and they physically assaulted me. They began pulling at him and tearing at him, and it turned into a full-fledged physical assault. And they tore him off me, ripped him into shreds, ripped the fabric into shreds down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities. Back then, Pittsburgh, my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt, my hat, my tube socks, and my kids' tennis shoes. Went on like they had done the funniest thing ever, high five. And I went out in the busy street, gathered up the shreds, covered up my Fruit of the Looms or whatever they were, and waddled home. People, they thought they had done the funniest thing ever. People gawked, no one stopped. And I got home. The house was funeral silent. Nobody was home. And I walked down to our basement. And it was these wooden chairs, wooden stairs. And I heard them, they creaked. And with every creak, Lillian, I thought the whole world knew my shame. My parents, my brothers, and how could anyone ever love somebody who allowed that to happen to him, a fat pig who allowed that to happen to him? So I took the shreds and I buried them at the bottom of this wastebasket, hoping that would bury my shame. And I never told anyone. And that moment was so traumatic, I could go to Pittsburgh, PA, and show you exactly where it happened within feet. And it was right around then that I started to see a different Brian in the mirror, a fat pig, a monster who wasn't worthy of love from anyone, from his mother, who loved me dearly, but was just struggling with her own mental health issues, with my brothers, who I wasn't going to tell about it because, dude, you can't stand up to bullies, although they would have protected me. Mm-hmm. I was just too ashamed. My father, I wasn't going to tell anyone, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning.
Isn't it amazing? You tell this story and you take us there. You're such an excellent storyteller. Okay. And I had shared this with Brian before we went on the air, that it's probably the first memoir I read from cover to cover. Because, there are people that I love that have an addictive mentality, or maybe drink too much, or maybe aren't dealing with some of the issues in their life. And as I was reading this, and you also, what I loved about your book is that you had other recovered addicts tell their story, which is, you see that, you hear the pain, you see the pain, you can almost feel their pain and how much they lost. And at times that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to lose everything. The addiction it doesn't matter what social economic background you have, how religious you are, you can fall victim to it. Would you say, and I know that I'm having a conversation with a lawyer, because it's like every word means something in law. And so with you, and as you were writing the book, did you feel that as the reader is associating with the story, that they will see themselves in any of these stories, or do you feel that people will read this that have an addictive personality and go, well, it's a good thing I just like to drink? Like you say in the book, I did not think I had an addiction. I just thought I liked to drink.
Well, I mean, I don't project my story onto anyone. What I wanted to show when I wrote is that whether it's me or someone else, there are commonalities in the process. Okay, so I mean, I've traded Mavericks championship tickets to my cocaine dealer, right? So probably no one in this world can identify with that specific thing. But the commonalities were doing wild things, you know, in it to get my drugs. That's a commonality, the things we do, right? Although it'll be something else. And that's what I wanted to show, that regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of privilege, there are commonalities. Now, obviously, I have privilege. I would be disingenuous not to acknowledge that. I have skin color privilege. I have economic privilege. I have privilege on multiple levels. Doesn't mean I took advantage of that to help myself. Addiction or substance use disorder on an individual basis does not discriminate, Lillian, right? But from a socioeconomic basis, it does in fact impact different communities differently. So we can argue, quibble over the definition of discrimination, but it does impact different communities differently. Correct. Some harder than others. Correct. You only have to go to, places in Florida or Kensington, Philadelphia to understand that.
And I love,
and that's why I had the different stories, because I wanted to show that.
That's right. That's right. And I love how your family along the way was there for you. And
that's another privilege.
Yeah, that is a privilege. And
that is a huge privilege.
Yeah. And so that right there can be, you could have rejected that. You could have walked away from that, because people do. So at what point, because you know, you ultimately made the choice. You ultimately made the choice to get better. But in my mind, and as a life coach and as someone who helps people, I guess I want to understand this. Did you start resolving, because you had body dysmorphic disorder, you have all these issues that started from that one incident that you hid and it stored in your body, that started to manifest into who you believed you were? Well, at what point do you start dealing with that in order to get to addiction?
I want to make it clear is that, that was certainly a pivotal traumatic incident. I think there are environmental variables, social variables. I was already somebody who trended towards, just not being a very assertive, and I tend to be a very social isolationist person. So there were many variables that came together, although that was an important traumatic incident in the story.
Correct.
There were times, in 2005, after a near suicide attempt, my brothers hauled me down to a psychiatric hospital and I wasn't ready. Okay. I fought it tooth and nail. So why not then, or versus Easter weekend 2007 when I was ready? I couldn't tell you. If we figure that out, we'll win the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
What are the moments that matter? Because it's always in hindsight.
Yes.
In 2005, when I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand, and you would think that's rock bottom, quote unquote rock bottom. I prefer recovery tipping point, but you would think that's rock bottom. It wasn't. So, in 2007, it was. I remember, Lillian, I was standing in the parking lot of the psychiatric hospital waiting an intake for the second time after a drug and alcohol-induced blackout, 2-day blackout, when my now wife, she stood by me. We'd only been dating for a year or so, came home from a trip and found me in bed with drugs everywhere and alcohol and Xanax scattered about, and knew nothing about my issues. I was pretty good at hiding all that stuff. And people say, how can you hide it? I'm telling you, I have a JD, but I had a PhD in concealment. And that's not unusual for people struggling with substance use disorder, right? We're good. I was a great liar. But, and so we're standing in the parking lot and I'm thinking three things occurred to me. One, there wouldn't be a third trip back to that hospital. I'd be dead. Two, she was going to leave, but she stood by me. And we've now passed 5 years in marriage and going on 16 years together. And there's a story there too. And three, I thought about my family. I thought about something my father said to Mark, always said to Mark, Jeff, and I growing up. And this was really pivotal. He would say to us, guys, wherever you go in life, call your brother. Make sure your brother's okay. Tell your brother you love him. Mm-hmm. My father was the middle of three boys like me. Mm-hmm. He understood the gift, the bond of family. He and his older brother, Marty, operated a trim shop, and that's where you put on convertible seats and you reupholster seats, a very working class type job, in the same spot in Pittsburgh for over 40 years. Wow. From when the Korean War ended till his older brother passed. And he and his brothers had the same relationship. And I thought about that. And why then, I don't know, but I wasn't ready to lose my family. Not that I'd lose their love, but family's distance. I'd stopped seeing my nieces and nephews. They get frustrated, right? I had distanced myself away from them. And I knew my family was just throwing up their hands, and I didn't want to lose them. And I didn't want to disappoint my father and lose that gift, sever that gift that he had worked so hard to give us. Mm-hmm. And if you want to know how that gift was passed down, all these decades later, 1,200 miles from Pittsburgh, Mark, Jeff, and I, my two brothers, and I live walking distance to each other. And my father, until he passed away 3.5 years ago, lived across the street from me. That is how that gift stuck. And I wasn't ready to lose it. And I was ready to take that scary step forward.
Well, I'm glad that you did, because when you take that step forward, you give permission to others to do it too. And you do that throughout the book. I want to encourage all of you to get the book and show it. He's my Vanna White today. Yes, the addicted lawyer. It is really, it's a story of his experience. And you're going, gosh, it allows us into a glimpse into the mind of an addict and the consequences. The fact that we cannot think about the consequences all the way through. Although you have a scene there where you're when you just said this earlier, when you sold your tickets to your the guy that supplied the cocaine, you sold your tickets, your Maverick tickets and you ended up thinking that the police were outdoors and all the stuff that was going through your mind. Share a little bit about the paranoia that comes with.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, when my brother bought the Mavs in 2000, and this was June 2006, and it was our first trip to the NBA championship to the Miami Heat, which we ended up losing to. But as you might expect, I was going to get some good seats. So I had the opportunity to get some tickets for friends. So I called up my brother, Mark, and he said, sure. I got the tickets, and I didn't sell them on eBay. I didn't scalp them.
You don't want any track record, right?
I called up my cocaine dealer and traded him for $1,000 in cocaine. He shows up at my house. I give him the tickets. He gives me a giant Ziploc baggie of cocaine. I go running up to my home office, dump it out on my long wooden desk like I'm Scarface, wanting to go, right, rub your nose in it. And I line it out, my nasty dollar bill, line it out. And Lillian, cocaine users, and I know this, we're an ironic bunch. You go to the bathroom, you wash your hands, in pandemic, you put the hand sanitizer on, but we'll stick a dollar bill up our nose that's been used by God knows who and has God knows what on it, probably someone else's blow or meth or whatever. And inhale, go figure. But at that point, I was really just chasing a high that was never going to come again. It had stopped being fun. But I grew very paranoid, as sometimes happens with long-term cocaine use. And I peek out the window. I think the cops were out there. And I'm so paranoid, and they weren't. I'm so paranoid that I hide the cocaine. I drive to a Home Depot, or it was a Lowe's where I buy electrical faceplates, a drill, and a saw. I drive back to my house. I go to the drywall upstairs in the closets, bzz, 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 and cut out these fake electrical outlets and put the cocaine in smaller Ziploc baggies and slap it behind all these fake electrical outlets, close it up, thinking I'm the smartest lawyer ever. Like the DEA, the cops, and the drug dogs have never thought of that before.
No.
And then I do some more, I do some more blow, and again, just pain and shame. And Lillian, it was never an epiphany that I may have a problem. It was maybe I need to change dealers. Maybe I need to switch out the Grey Goose for the Jack Daniels. And then the paranoia comes again. I go back to those same electrical outlets, but maybe an hour later, take the cocaine out, put it back in the giant Ziploc baggie, go to the toilet in my master bedroom and flush it down the toilet. Then now it's $900 worth of cocaine. The next morning comes, I wake up. Did I flush all that down the toilet? Wow, there's another game tonight. I call my brother, 2 more tickets, another call to my cocaine dealer. He shows up at my house and said, dude, you did all that last night? I don't want to tell him I flushed it down the toilet like a moron. Yes, give me more. He gives it to me. Back up to my house, back up to my desk, rinse, wash, repeat. Do some more, get all paranoid, hide it behind the electrical outlets. And then one more time, take it back out, go to that same toilet, drop to my knees like I had done so many times, hoping or praying for someone or something to take the pain of my addiction away and give me hope for a future, and flushed it down the toilet again. They do say when Dallas flushes, it runs downhill to Houston. So maybe some people in Houston had a little hop in their step those 2 nights,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
That would be insanity of addiction, doing the same thing over and over and expect the same way, expecting a different result. But it's not insane. It's a biological brain-based process that has.
well, let's talk about the biological brain-based process. Let's talk about that. I mean, I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are watching today, hopefully a lot of people that can relate to what you're saying and maybe hearing you, seeing themselves in your story. And that's what I'm hoping to today, that someone will say, you know what, maybe I need to deal with my past trauma. Maybe I need to forgive my parents. Maybe I need to, do whatever it is to achieve that pivotal moment where you say, okay, it's not the dealer, it's not the Jack Daniels, it's me. It's me. And
that's an interesting point, because I have obviously I'll keep him anonymous. I have a guy I used to party with, one of the first guys, is now trying to find his way to recovery. Mm-hmm. And I got a text from him and it said, Brian, I apologize for enabling you and doing all this stuff. And I said, you don't need to apologize to me. You owe me nothing. I did it to myself.
Correct.
And
Correct.
So, you're right. I mean, I have to take, part of recovery is taking responsibility for my behavior and, and dealing with that.
Well, so before we go to the next, I want to acknowledge the work that you're doing. I think it's wonderful. I want all of you that, this classroom is about, if you take one word, the one word that describes what we're doing here is responsibility. But it's not the responsibility that we relate to blame, shame, fault, or duty, because that's the way, fine, I'll take responsibility, nobody else will do it. No, it's the kind of responsibility that leads to empowerment and freedom.
Well, let's add a second word.
Excuse me?
Let's add a second word.
No, okay.
Hope.
Well, of course.
There is only one. What I ask this question all the time. What's the only prerequisite to finding recovery? There's only one. There's only one. People will say wanting it, this and that. You have to want it. No. Being alive, being above ground is
grateful. Grateful.
The only prerequisite to recovery. As long as you are above ground, there is hope for recovery. Now, what recovery means to you is for you to decide. My path is abstinence, right? I couldn't just do 1 line of cocaine or take 1 drink. My path had to be abstinence, sobriety, complete sobriety. But people struggle with opioids and there's harm reduction and people are doing many different things and every path is valid. Have hope for your future because there's a living your best life as possible. And what does that mean? You have to decide. You have to decide what that means. I can't decide for you. Yeah,
absolutely. But, it's like, after reading your book and after understanding the addictive mentality, and I've coached some people that have addiction issues. When I read all that, I realized that, the behavior, you say you got a choice, you have a choice. When you're drilling holes on walls and putting cocaine in walls and you're doing all that, that doesn't make sense. It's like you didn't have a choice at that moment. At what moment do you say somebody is rational enough to make that choice? You're by the toilet, you're praying that God
Lillian, I'm not competent to make that statement. I mean, I'm only an expert in my story, nothing else.
No, but what was it for you? What was it at what point did your rational mind take over and say, you know what, you're worth more? Because as I was reading your book, you're obviously an empath. You're an empathic person. And when I'm also empathic. And when I was going through my personal journey of becoming, of learning about myself and later became a coach, one thing that I learned is that empaths turn to either drugs or they numb themselves. They block their emotions so that they don't get hurt. I blocked my emotions. You turned to drugs, but we're both empaths. So at what point did you say, I can make this choice today?
Well, that was standing in the parking lot of the psychiatric hospital for the second time. But you have to remember, there are five stages of change, right? Mm-hmm. I had for some time before that, I had begun thinking about it, but I just didn't know how. I remember when my now wife moved in with me, and this was, I want to say, some point in 2006, one of my friends said to me, one of the guys I did blow with and party with, he said, okay, she doesn't do any of that. You do what you do. How's that going to work? Mm-hmm. Right. And I said to him, well, now it's going to cause me to stop, which isn't how addiction works either. But I'm now in the stage, I'm starting to think about it. Okay. So it wasn't, I just didn't know how, right? I just didn't know how. And when I made that decision, I still didn't know how. Mm-hmm. The next day I walked into my therapist's office, who I'd been lying to. Well, why would you lie to your therapist? Shame knows no hourly rate. I was ashamed. I was ashamed of what I had done. And I was ashamed of my, I disappointed my family, myself, and all of these things. And I finally began allowing myself to be vulnerable, which is hard for a lawyer because we are taught to take advantage of vulnerability, not allow ourselves to be vulnerable, mm-hmm. right, in the courtroom and such. So I finally allowed myself to share some of my pain, which was the first time ever. And we started talking about options, and he suggested residential treatment. And I was very resistant to that for a number of reasons. My ego was still way off the charts. And the only other option he gave me was 12-step. And so I decided that I would try 12-step, if not even for myself, but to show I was afraid of losing my family. And I didn't want my now wife to leave me and all these different things. So I decided I would walk into the rooms of 12-step. And I sat in that chair for the very first time, April 8th. 2007. And when I sat in that chair, Lillian, what was funny is I didn't know if I was a quote unquote alcoholic. And why do I put that in air quotes? It's because it's a label. It's alcohol use disorder is the medical diagnosis. Mm-hmm. It's an often helpful label to tell us we have a problem. But what I wanted sitting in that chair in 12-step for the first time was to wake up for the first time in my life ever. And now I'm in my 40s, ever walk to the mirror birthday suit naked and love myself without the aid of cocaine or alcohol. That's all I wanted. That is all I wanted, whether I was an alcoholic or not. I just wanted for the first time in my life to wake up and love myself. And if sitting in that chair would give me that gift, I would sit. And I sat and I sat. But it wasn't as easy as just sitting, right? Because 12-step, and for those who don't know, the most well-known is AA, but there are others. That was dealing with where I was, sobriety. I had to deal with how I got there. I had to deal with that little boy, that 12-year-old boy who was so hurt, who was so ashamed, who felt like no one loved him, Lillian, who I had been dragging around mm-hmm. on a tractor trailer trailer over a gravel road on a chain with his little suitcase, right? Stuffing all of my pain and shame into that suitcase, watching it ball my entire life. I had to let that little boy know he was loved and it wasn't his fault, because that was the only way the full healing process was going to take place. Otherwise, I would always be this close to relapse. And I knew that. And I don't impose that on anyone else. That's my path.
I love that. I love that you're sharing that, because I was going to ask you that question, where have you dealt with the emotional aspect? Because many people spend a lot of money fixing their body, They want to fix their body, whether it's disease or it's, they don't like what the body looks like. They spend a lot of money. But Dr. Lee Cowden had come. He's a functional doctor who's an MD who became a functional doctor. He said in the classroom, he said, Lily, people spend a lot of money and it could be very expensive to heal the body, to fix the body. But if you fix the mind and the spirit, the body will heal itself.
Well, I'll tell you something. I have, and this is very common with body dysmorphic disorder. I've had multiple hair transplants, liposuction. I have abused anabolic steroids and I've gotten huge. None of it changed what I saw in the mirror. None of it. None of it healed my soul or the shame in my stomach.
I'm glad that you did go back and start to do today. Are you loving yourself? Are you able to?
It's a process. I'm still in therapy, which you have to remember, body discontent isn't everyone in this, industrialized world probably looks in the mirror at one time or another and says, man, that sucks, right? Having a bad day on the, I say, a pimple, I feel a little heavier. That's normative discontent. That's part of being human. Mm-hmm. Do I allow those normative discontent feelings to trigger me into unhealthy behaviors? No. And I'm still in therapy. I talk to a therapist once a week. I take antidepressants because I suffer from, major depressive episodes separate from my addiction. They can cross or they can exist separately, right? Mm-hmm. And they're often co-occurring, but that one can't exist independently of the other. So I'm always trying to heal that little boy a little more because that heals, Boomer Brian a little more.
Very good. Very good. So before we continue on, because I do want to look at solutions and looking at other things, other suggestions that could help move towards sobriety. I just want to encourage you guys all to go to whenyouneedafriend.com. Please subscribe while you're there. Every week you get a blog and you'll have all the information, all the teachers that are in the classroom. You just click on on Brian's name. It'll take you to both his books, the one that talks about his bulimia and what is the name of that book? I just left my head.
Lawyer?
The Naked.
No,
not The Addicted Lawyer.
Oh, The Ambulance Chaser, my new novel.
No, that's the Body Dysmorphic.
Shattered Image.
The Shattered Image. So that's another one. So if you are looking at yourself in the mirror and you don't like what you see, maybe Brian's journey with that will help you as well. So there are several books, not just The Addicted Lawyer, that you can look at. But when you go to whenyouneedafriend.com, please subscribe, follow all my social media, including BitChute and Odyssey, that we're being censored in the classroom. Many of the things that we talk about, there's larger corporations that don't want you to know that there is freedom. And it doesn't have to be very expensive. It could be as little as just making a choice, as Brian said. So with that in mind, just make sure that you check out my sponsors. Also, my Shop Now bag that has all of the things that you need, products that I use that are organic and safe, and that will help you heal pain-free, products that will help you heal without any medication, that will help promote that healing in your body. So check out my Shop Now bag and Jennifer Grammett, the sponsors, and you too can become an enrolled student in the classroom. So I want to encourage you to give of your time, your talent, your treasure, help us grow the classroom and become an enrolled student in the classroom. Today, we're talking to Brian Cuban. You can find him at briancuban.com. And yes, he has his new novel, which I would love to read. It sounds like something up my alley because I've dealt with a lot of attorneys in my lifetime. Share a little bit about your book and your latest novel. You're an excellent writer. I'm sure it's a wonderful book.
I hope this one stands up to that. This is my debut fiction. All novels are fiction, obviously. My debut novel. It is about a personal injury lawyer who finds himself accused of the murder of a high school classmate 30 years prior after her remains are discovered in a vacant lot. He is arrested, charged, but he flees to find the one person who can both prove his innocence and save the life of his son who has been abducted.
Wow.
And it is releasing December 7th.
December 7th. Okay. So if you guys like fiction, this is a great book to get. But if you guys are if any of you friends are out there dealing with an emotional issue. The both books that he was talking about, Shattered Image or The Addicted Lawyer, and especially if you are a professional and admitting that you have an issue could cost you your license, now's the time to really look at things before things get worse. And so I just want to lovingly encourage all of you. Also, I have a workshop on January 14th, 15th, 16th called I Am the Solution. And this is a way that you look at the emotional aspects of your life that need to be healed, develop a relationship with a higher power, whatever that higher power is to you. And also solution is an acronym to living your best life. And so I want to encourage you to look into that. The other things, it's in the Shop Now bag, and the I Am the Solution. It's the New Truth series workshops, and also DVDs that we have as well. So check those out. Okay, so let's focus on solutions. So you had talked about dealing with the little Brian. And ironically enough, you talk about pulling that load of emotions with you for the rest of your life, but you could have just dealt with it and at the time. But that didn't happen. You had to learn the way you did. I think it's all perfect. It's all perfect, right? So with that in mind, you became your own bully. Brian became your own bully.
Absolutely.
And so with that in mind and that awareness, what are other tips that you can give someone who's watching today, maybe, or watching in the future, because this will be uploaded into all the social media? So what would you say are some of the tips that you can offer someone, suggestions?
Well, the biggest one, when we just get away from standard tips about recovery, is that most of the thoughts we have, the majority of thoughts we have in any given day are negative, right? That's just proven scientifically. And we can tend to be our own bully and our own worst critic. And when we start buying into all of those negative thoughts without realizing that our thoughts do not define us, right? So, and what happens when we do that? We begin projecting out that if we buy into those negative thoughts, everyone else must be thinking that about us, which is rarely true.
Correct.
So find someone in a safe place to share your thoughts with. Find your compassionate community. Create a compassionate community of people where if you have negative thoughts, you can bounce them off without judgment, whether it's Lillian or whoever, right? Because more often than not, they are not true. I tell myself every day, I am not my thoughts, that my thoughts do not define me. That would be one of the biggest things. Your thoughts do not define you. Most of the times it's projection. And as we get into, when I allowed, I don't like to say we, because I'm not an expert, when I got into it, the drugs and alcohol, I mean, that compresses even more, and you become even more convinced that I am that. I am unworthy of love. I am unworthy of loving myself, and it becomes this brutal cycle. One of the ways just to break free for just a second by finding a compassionate community soulmate, whether it's family, and if you don't have family, someone like Dr. Lillian or somebody who can you can bounce it off and say, look, that's not what I see. That's not what I hear.
And you can rewrite the program too, which is what we work on in the workshop, is rewriting the program. You're not that person that you were, and you can be a loving adult. You, Brian, can be your own loving adult. Me, Lily, can be the loving adult of that child that didn't have that loving adult nurturing and hugging and making you feel.
Recovery is for me always about rewriting the program, right? It's a constant state of evolution.
Right.
That is why when people, that is why, again, I always stress, all I'm an expert in is my story.
Correct.
Someone else's path is different. Someone else in recovery, whether it's opioids, cocaine, alcohol, what recovery in a full life looks like to that person may have no relationship to what it looks like for me. So,
and that's very fair.
Yeah.
And many people say baby steps, but I've had Dr. Joel Furman, who is a nutritional doctor. He's a nutritarian, unbelievable, that works with food as medicine. He says, you don't want to do baby steps when it comes to, cocaine, and you don't want to do baby steps because you've got to cut it cold turkey.
Just in a general, I would differ from him. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
I would vehemently differ with him on that, because I know many people, let's say with opioids, who are involved in harm reduction, and they are on Suboxone or they are on methadone, and they are living wonderful lives. Now, what does recovery look like for them? I don't preach abstinence to them, right? And so their recovery looks very different from mine. Now, could I just use cocaine recreationally? Many people do and live lives. Okay, that's a whole different conversation. That couldn't be for me.
No.
But as a general statement, I would on a core level differ on that conclusion.
Okay. And what are other, you had talked about the 12 steps. We only have 5 minutes in the regular. And by the way, for those of you who have any questions for Brian, make sure you type in a Q, write your question down, and we're going to have a teacher's pet corner, which we get to ask your questions to Brian. So you talk about the 12-step program and how difficult it was to the higher power aspect of it. There are 12-step programs that don't include that.
Sure. There's refuge recovery.
Mm-hmm.
There are. That's the main one. I know refuge recovery. If you are religious and you want that involved, there's celebrate recovery. There are many different. If you want to go behavior modification, there's smart recovery, SMART. That is not 12-step based. It's behavior modification based. Mm-hmm. So there are many different ways to go. Or I know people. You have to remember, Lily. Most people recover without any of that, right? We don't like to talk about that. The vast majority, not the vast majority, but I'll say over 50% of people recover without doing anything. They just do it on their own. Mm-hmm. So, and they just go on and live their lives. So there are many different ways to go. I couldn't do self-recovery. Obviously, it didn't work. It would never have worked for me, and it didn't. But this is why we have to meet people where they are. What are you struggling with? What does your life look like? Your personal life, your social life, your life with your family, your work life. What do all these things look like? And what do you want it to look like? Versus saying, I went cold turkey on the blow or the heroin or whatever. You got to do it too, or you're going to die. Yeah. That is one of my pet peeves.
I like that. I like the fact that you meet people where they're at. That's the only way you can help somebody, because if you're communicating with someone in Chinese and they only speak English, they're not going to understand what you're saying. You're going to drive them
away. You're going to drive them away. Mm-hmm. So it is important that we understand where a person is coming from and what a person wants, versus saying, I want you to want what I want.
Exactly.
And I want you to recover, and I want you to want that, but the path, I'm not going to tell you, I want you to take my path.
That's right. Everybody has their own yellow brick road. And, whether you fall out of the brick road or not, every time you come back into the yellow brick road, you're wiser and stronger. Hopefully
that's resilience.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you'll bring people along the way and you'll see reality. Sometimes it takes a really tough time. Other times it requires for you to see others to do it. I'm a type of person is like, I see my siblings or people I love making choices, and I can see and learn from their choices that they've made. But there are other people that have to make the decision and live the pain and go through that time and time again. Let's talk real quick before we finish the podcast today. Let's talk about hope, because that is the most important aspect here is hope. You got 2 minutes.
I mean, as I said, as long as you are above ground, there is always hope for a full life, right? And and I say that again, and I acknowledge from a place of privilege. What hope looks like is going to be different in different communities. Finding hope in an underserved community, in communities where there's a lot of financial issues and poverty and broken homes, that's how do you give hope to that person? Mm-hmm. And so it comes from hope covers so many different areas. Hope has to come from community, right? Hope starts with community, wherever you are, compassionate community, and the resources to build that community. So
beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay, so show your book. Okay, it's called The Addicted Lawyer. An ambulance chase. Okay, The Addicted Lawyer. We got to get our cues right. Okay, The Addicted Lawyer. That's the book I just read. Want to encourage you, whether you are in an addicted relationship, or if the person that you know is addicted, it's a great to understand the mindset. And there's lots of different stories. I would say probably about 6 or 7. I don't know how many stories.
From law students and other lawyers.
Yes. And so, and if you are an attorney, if you are a lawyer and you can identify with this and you're concerned that maybe there's too much repercussion if you come clean with the fact, think again. There are people that are there to support you. Real quick, because I know I'm just trying to, okay. So I'm hearing the cue here. Okay. So Brian, I'm really excited that we're having this conversation. We're going to have a teacher's pet conversation. So ask your questions and we'll ask Brian your questions. And please remember to go to briancuban.com. The new book is out. It's a novel. So check it out. The Ambulance Chaser, and use this to put some thought into how you want your life to look at. Thank you so much, Brian, for
Thank you, Lillian.
being our teacher today. And please remember, we'll be right here waiting for you worldwide at whenyouneedafriend.com. This is Lillian McDermott and Brian Cuban wishing you love, peace, joy, and unexpected abundance. Make it the best
The
day
opinions and advice
ever.
expressed on the Lillian McDermott radio show are intended for the individual callers and guests on the program and are presented to our wider audience solely for general educational purposes. Please act responsibly and consult personally with your own medical, psychological, or nutritional expert before taking any steps to improve your life.
Very good, Brian. I really, I'm so grateful that you have come out and you've shared your story, because when you do that, you give permission for others to share.
Absolutely.
I say this all the time. I say it in the workshop that I do, because, people will come in thinking that they're the only ones that have ever experienced whatever it is that they're experiencing. But the reality is it's all in their head. It's not real. If you're experiencing it, chances are somebody else has experienced it. So what can you say when it comes to someone who just doesn't want to unravel the bully within, that moment that may have been, and maybe they just want to blame everybody else and not see that their choices.
I'd say you're going through a very human process. Shame is no. This is why I don't do. When someone said, one thing you'll never hear me say is there's no reason to be ashamed. Okay, because that delegitimizes a normal human body protective response.
Absolutely, shame
right?
is good up to a certain point.
Yeah, shame. So I don't say there's no reason to be ashamed, because who am I to tell someone there's no reason to be ashamed? People may have very valid what they think are valid reasons for feeling ashamed. So what I tell people is, how is that impacting your life? What are the negative behaviors you're engaging in, and what do you want to see in your life 6 months from now, or a year from now, and how is that shame keeping you from getting there? And so think about that.
Yeah. Because
it may be a normal reaction, but is it blocking you from achieving your best life? And it's not for me to tell you how to unravel that, but there are ways to unravel it, right? Therapy, life coach, or whatever your choices are. But again, it all boils down to creating a compassionate community where you can take that first scary step, and being scared is normal. Being terrified is normal. Once again, a normal human body defense response. But, even just a tiny little step. The way I like to put it is like skydiving, right? The easy part is pushing yourself to the edge of the plane. The hard part is the moment of weightlessness where you're worried that parachute's not going to open. Mm-hmm. So at some point you create the community around you that's going to make sure the parachute opens, and trust that process.
Very good. Now, in your book, you quote Brian Tannenbaum, and he's an attorney in I guess Miami is where
very good friend
he's at. Yeah, and so there are some suggestions that he talks about in the book, but I'd like for you to, if somebody's watching today or tomorrow or someday in the future, and you pick up this video and you start watching it on being addicted and being an attorney, or there were 3 steps. There was a seek help, hide the biggest mistakes that people can do is they try to hide the problem. They don't talk to people. But he was saying, seek help. Don't try to hide the problem. Bring the problem into these are, I guess, the biggest mistakes they make. So they think that seeking help is going to cause a problem. So what are some of the, if somebody's watching that is concerned about maybe losing their license to work or to practice, what would be some of the tips that you can give for an attorney specifically?
I mean, again, it's finding a safe place to discuss. And in the legal profession, we have what are known as lawyers' assistance programs. Mm-hmm. And the Florida, for those in Florida, and Brian is in Florida, it's wonderful. It is just, and I used to be on the advisory committee of TLAP, the Texas Lawyers Assistance Programs. And they are specifically there to help, whether it's alcohol, drugs, depression, or whatever the issue is, right? Mm-hmm. And lawyers are often worried that it is not confidential. It will get out if they seek help, that it's an arm of the state bar. And none of that is true. Correct. It is confidential in every state in the country by statute. It is. And so the first step would be they do nothing but work with lawyers with struggles. So it's the best place to start, and they're easy to find. You just have to Google or go, what your different jurisdiction, and that would be the best place to start. And no matter how many times I squawk about that, a lawyer will say it's not confidential. And you can also call them up and express concern about a lawyer without giving your name, right? No one's tracing your call. No one is going to know you reported a lawyer, that you ratted out one of your friends. You're expressing concern over your friend by sharing that information, because it could spontaneously get better, but that rarely happens. There is something called the Peter principle of addiction that I talk about.
Yeah.
It is when a lawyer is struggling, there is no such thing as a high functioning lawyer who is struggling with drugs and alcohol. There are only levels of loss of functioning, right? Until eventually it drops off the cliff, malpractice, misconduct. Now you are before the state bar, and you're being forced into seeking help. But what lawyers do, and what I've seen and what I did, is as the bar of competent performance keeps dropping, you keep kneeling, right, to stay below it, so you can tell yourself there is this great high functioning lawyer, when actually now you're giving crappy service to your clients. You might be missing hearings. You're not returning phone calls. You might be showing up to court hungover, or like me, under the influence. And so the more you kick the can down the road, the worse things are going to be in the end. And I'm confident in saying that as a generalization, because people do recover without help, but if it's bad enough that you're thinking about it, probably not.
Yeah. You had mentioned across the board, you mentioned Florida, that they have a system where you can turn somebody in. Every state. So that's what I was going to ask you. Does every state have? Okay, great.
Texas has TLAP, the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. Florida has the Floyers. If you're in Montana, the Montana, however they phrase it, it's every state. Yeah. And there are even local bar associations in bigger cities with that have their own peer assistance committees. So there's always help. It's why are you not getting it? And
that's a good start. Why is a good question. What is your why? Why is your why? Why do you want to get better? And why would you want to get better?
And I hear from lawyers and law students all the time, and I just do it, right? I'm not, like I said, because all I have is my experience, and I say, and I talk to them, what is it you want? How does your life look, right? Well, I just won this case. Can't be that bad. Well, how's your life with how's your marriage? How's your relationship with your kids? How's this going? And then all of a sudden you hear, rah, rah, rah. Well, is that really the life you want? And do you think this could be a part of it?
Many people know what they don't want. They just don't figure out what they do want.
Well, they're afraid to figure out. They're afraid to figure out what they do want, because changing your life is scary. Changing your life for life can be scary.
I'm very grateful to you. I'm glad that, and real quick, because I do want to talk about bulimia. You hear about women with bulimia and anorexia, but very seldom do you ever hear about a man having bulimia or anorexia. how difficult was that for you
Well,
to come
I hear
forward?
about it all the time because I'm in tune to it,
Yes,
but most people don't. But
exactly.
the last stat I saw was that 1 in 3 of all those with eating disorders are male. So
Wow.
even though only 1 in 10 will seek treatment because of the stigma. Eating disorders even today are very underrepresented. Males with eating disorders are an underrepresented demographic in terms of recovery, advocacy, and treatment options. Although they're out there, but it's very easy, even in the even in 2021, going to 22, for a male to be very ashamed about it and feel that there's no help for him. So I'm always out there. People reach out to me all the time and say,
Well,
hey, you're not alone.
So they can reach you at briancuban.com.
At briancuban.com, yes.
Okay. So if there's anything that was said today that's going to get you towards a step towards recovery or feeling love for yourself, whatever it is, please reach out to Brian or reach out to me as well. briancuban.com. You can go there. You're going to be going on the road once you, for your book or
sure. We don't know how COVID is going to play into all of it, but I will be. I do have a book tour planned. Dallas obviously is the first one, Pittsburgh, and then Miami, and then New York City. So it could be coming to a city near you. And if you want to stay in tune to where these signings are coming, you can go to authorbriancuban.com, scroll to the bottom and enter your information.
Okay. I think I'll do that.
The data is not shared.
Yeah, this is a great, honest conversation about recovery. One last question before we go, because I've heard of the term dry drunk. They're not drinking, but their behaviors are still as if they were drinking. How difficult was that for you?
I hate that term because it's a 12-step term that really has meaning.
I've heard it before.
Yeah, so have I. It's used all the time in 12-step, right?
Yeah.
Dry drunk. Because I find it a very judgmental term.
Okay, so what would you call it?
I call it somebody who is still figuring out what recovery means to them. There is, sure, I mean, in recovery, just being sober is just one aspect of recovery, right? You're dealing with all the other stuff, and many people have many different problems. But I think when we say dry drunk, it's especially, and it has in 12-step, in my opinion, become a pejorative, kind of a judgmental pejorative. Mm-hmm. So people just are in different stages of recovery and figuring out what that means and how you can improve on it. You can be in recovery and still be a jerk, right? You can be in recovery and still commit a crime. You can be in recovery, still, have marital problems, children problems, and all these different things. Recovery.
Heck, it could happen for people that aren't in recovery. Sure. Everyday regular people.
Sure. Recovery is more than just sobriety, more than just abstinence or whatever your path is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is one last question before we go. What brings you joy today?
My wife, my family, my pets, writing, bringing other people hope by sharing my story.
Well done. Well done. You've done a great job. Thank you so much, Brian. And for those of you who want to learn more, again, briancuban.com. You can go check out his writing. It's in the areas where he's at. Go to author Brian. Is it briancuban.com?
Authorbriancuban.com is my author page. And at the bottom, you can enter your information and stay up to date on my book tour.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all that you're doing to help people get closer to sobriety. So
thank you for having me, Lillian. It was
my pleasure. My pleasure. And for those of you who are watching today, just tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to have Dr. Lorraine Day in the classroom. So everybody loves her. So we're going to see you tomorrow.